And thank you very much, Ishmael, for those comments and for your support. We really appreciate it. And throughout this conference, we've been really pleased to showcase the leaders of the regional airline industry. But as you can see, just by walking through our display area, we would be nothing without our partners. And speaking of partners, I would next like to welcome some of my colleagues who head up the trade associations representing the broader aviation industry. Last year, more than ever, we all worked shoulder to shoulder with one another and our labor partners to get the CARES Act and the subsequent iterations across the finish line. And I think I can safely say, if we weren't working together, we would not have been successful. And then we worked together with our airport colleagues as well, making sure that every element of the passenger journey was as safe as possible. So please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage, starting with Nick Calio. And we won't make you do like a runway. You can all just come up and take your seats and then I'll join you. Nope, no assigned seating, but you can maybe leave me the last chair. So please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage, starting with Nick Calio. Nick is president and CEO of Airlines for America, who represents the major airlines who partner with many of our own members. Under his leadership, A4A rebranded and honed its focus on shaping regulatory policies and priorities that improve air travel for everyone. Prior to joining A4A in January 2011, Nick was Citigroup's executive vice president for global government affairs and a member of its senior leadership committee. Nick served in both Bush administrations, and between those roles, he worked at O'Brien and Calio, where he was named one of the 10 most powerful lobbyists in Washington. Nick holds a law degree from Case Western. Next is George Novak, president and CEO of the National Air Carriers Association, an organization of 19 Part 121 air carriers providing passenger and cargo air services. Before joining NACA in July 2018, George was the Assistant Vice President and Regulatory Counsel for Civil Aviation at the Aerospace Industries Association. And prior to joining the trade association world, George served as an aviation attorney and consultant, managing aviation sector projects in more than 70 countries, working with senior government officials on ICAO compliance strategies and with international development banks on the privatization and development of modernized transportation infrastructure. George has served at the FAA, lectured at George Washington University, and holds a Juris Doctor from my own alma mater, University of Pittsburgh, so I might add Delta Pitt. Next, please welcome Steve Alterman, who's led the Cargo Airline Association, which advocates, as you might guess by the name, for the all-cargo air carrier industry. Steve is also a senior partner in Myers and Alterman, a Washington, D.C. law firm specializing in air transportation law. Steve began his career in aviation in 1968, working for the United States Civil Aeronautics Board. In 1975, he joined the Cargo Airline Association as executive director, and in 1982 took the lead role as president. Steve and his team are great allies, and we've stood shoulder to shoulder on many issues, including workforce, over the past decade. Last but never least is Kevin Burke. He's president and CEO of Airports Council International North America. Since Kevin started in this role in 2014, he's expanded ACINA's reach and influence as the voice of airports in North America by amplifying the important role airports play in our everyday lives, unifying the industry behind shared priorities, and advancing a common cause with non-traditional allies. Before ACINA, Kevin led the American Apparel and Footwear Association, and he started his career at the Republican National Committee and later the Reagan-Bush presidential campaign. Spent time on Capitol Hill working for Representative Norm Lent. Kevin holds a master's degree from American University in Public Administration. Kevin, you're surrounded by airlines, and both of us are surrounded by CEOs with law degrees. So
I live with lawyers. Yeah, they don't frighten me.
All right, well, good. With that, I'm going to join our panelists, maybe confusing our AV folks a little bit, so you can transition. Why not? Now it is. Okay, well, let's begin. First of all, thanks for being here. I appreciate it very much.
Great to be here.
Very good. It's good to be here in person.
That's right. Nice to see human beings.
Good to see your faces. Yes. We had a speaker this morning said it's good to see everybody from the nose up. So very good. So Nick, I want to start with you. Our members and your members work together so closely, and together they make the global aviation industry truly global. And last week, the White House announced something that you have been working on for a very long time, and that's finally that in November, most international travel restrictions will be lifted in favor of some vaccine requirements and other rules. So at last, it seems like we have a roadmap. So tell me a little bit more about this. What's gone into it and what do you think is next?
Thank you, Faye. First of all, thank you for having all of us here, but particularly me. I would like to say one word about Senator Wicker. That man and his staff were horses for this industry. Sure were. They were incredible.
Sure were.
In terms of the international travel restrictions, forgive me, I just came back from a high school reunion and I talked for 4 days straight. So I'm a little gravelly. I'm always gravelly, but the international travel restrictions are a very good sign. It's a very hopeful sign. I don't think that the roadmap is as yet complete as we would like it. There's a lot of what they are thinking about that is TBD. So we've got to keep working at it. We had our board meeting last week or the week before, and part of the discussion that I posed to the board of directors was, we have done everything we could have done on this, and we've done it repeatedly to the point of creating the roadmap for the government. How do we want to beat our heads against the wall next on the same issue? And we went so far, as I said, to provide the roadmap to the government that we saw, because very early on in this process, the airlines and other stakeholders in our ecosystem got together to work with the Harvard School of Public Health to lean into the science and data and have a very clear independent view. And it worked. We had two parts to the study. The first was gate to gate with everything that airlines were doing. The second was curb to curb, where the airports came in to work with us as well to look at all the different layers of risk mitigation we could put in. So I will be frank to say that for a long while, we thought that the data and science indicated that we ought to be able to welcome visitors from foreign countries under certain conditions, just as they were doing to us. That didn't happen until last week. We are very hopeful that it moves forward. You have, understanding that the Delta variant put a little wrench into the works. But what has to happen is we need a roadmap for a number of things. How you can fly internationally and how you can expand flying internationally, both us flying there and flying back. It would be nice if we could all get together and work on harmonization a little bit. I went to Ireland recently to see Van Morrison, I might add, and well worth it. But a lot of testing, passenger locator form requirements, and changing from place to place where we were flying and flying through and then flying back here. It'd be nice if countries could get together and say that these are the basic requirements and maybe have some kind of digitalization of proof of vaccination or testing. So I'm going a little far and wide, but it's all good news. We need the international travel. You all saw the surge in domestic travel over the summer, which has waned some, at least among A4A members. We need international travel and business travel to come back as well, because there's a lot that goes into those two aspects that feed not only us, but the regionals and cargo.
So George and Nick, and anyone else who'd like to weigh in, I mean, with leisure travel leading so much of the initial recovery traffic, how do you see the market developing or moving in the next 12 to 18 months? And how will this change service models? And what are some of the minefields that could derail this?
So, first of all, let me recognize Nick for his leadership on that Harvard study, because I think that has enabled all of us actually to make the case for it is safe to fly. Procedures can be put into place. And through Nick's leadership and A4A's leadership in getting that study in place, that enabled all of us, and we all benefited from that. And I think being able to hold the science out has been critical to this whole recovery. So our carriers, a number of our carriers are ULCCs, they've actually done fairly well as, primarily leisure carriers during this part of the recovery. Nonetheless, I think we as an industry, are fully on board with the idea that international travel has to recover. Business travel has to recover in order to lift the entire industry. And that means our carriers, the carriers of all the organizations here. And it's true for cargo too. I mean, the broad economy needs to lift up, and that's going to happen through international and business travel recovery. So we do see there's a couple of minefields ahead that we don't know what's going to happen. And one of those is right now we're seeing the cases beginning to dip. again, but we could see another variant come up. We see vaccination hesitation. We see problems with masking, and obviously the onboard issues that we've seen. Those sometimes are frightening people away from the skies right now. And I think, again, all of our organizations have worked with the FAA, with TSA and others to ensure that people feel safe flying again. And part of that is the science of the Harvard study. Part of it is us working together and then getting the federal government on board also to make sure that passengers understand it is safe to fly. Your family's not going to experience an unpleasant situation with somebody attacking a flight attendant or a crew member, or just, begin to chant political statements in the middle of the skies. I mean, whatever it is, we need to work together. And I think that's not a roadblock so much, but that's a necessity for us to move forward, is this working together to address those issues and make it so that we're back to where people think flying is an everyday occurrence again. And we're not quite there yet, but we will get there.
We will get there.
We will get there.
I agree with George. We do need to continue the work of trying to convince people that it's safe to fly, and it is safe to fly. We're talking to Harvard again. The one thing about that study was we had to guarantee their independence, and that was at times difficult between our group of stakeholders, which included Boeing and Airbus, GE Aviation, Collins, the Vantage Airport Group, and later, everybody up here. And it was well worthwhile because that did change the narrative, the famous conclusion that you are safe or safer on an airplane than in a grocery store. So what we're trying to look at, we're thinking about looking at right now is that the intelligence of this particular virus is probably our biggest impediment. So what we're looking at is validating the results of that first study, even with the Delta variant, and not to go too scientific on you, but the transmissibility is far greater than what we originally looked at. However, we still have all those layers of risk mitigation, particularly the filtration system and the masking in place and the disinfection. But in terms of the transmissibility, it may be greater, but you have to file in as one of the variables the extent to which people have either had COVID or are vaccinated. So, we're going to have to keep doing this as an industry to make the case until people get comfortable. And Faye, the only thing I'd like to say about the unruly passengers, we've all been fighting that together. We're the ones that suggested, we are the ones who suggested that the FAA and TSA and the Department of Justice kind of ramp up what it was that they were doing to try to help make the case that there are consequences to not following the basic rules about masking. And so that has all happened, but just for context, there's been an uptick, certainly, and it's going down now, in the number of unruly passenger cases. It still has to be put in the context of the number of flights that are going every single day. And it's a huge number. So the times this happens are minuscule. The problem we have is it is the greatest social media event in the world, apparently. And so it doesn't, I don't think the number of incidents represent the number of flights that go off without a hitch or without an incident.
Just to add on to what George and Nick had said, Faye, first of all, Nick, for your leadership again on the Harvard study there, Nick convinced us to join, and we joined right away. The way I look at it, we represent all of the airports from the Mexican border to the Arctic Circle. So we have lots of airports within our sphere. In order to get on any one of your flights, they have to feel safe going through the airports that we service. And the key to that is teamwork. I remember early on asking the FAA administrator, could we put out a requirement for wearing masks at airports? Because every airport in the country is governed differently. They're either an authority or a city-owned airport, state-owned airport, and they all had different requirements. Some had them, some didn't. We thought the best thing to do was to have the FAA come up with a requirement that everybody entering an airport would have to be masked. Eventually that did happen. The only way we got from last April, which is the low point, I believe, for all of us, is we all get the same TSA data. We had about 86,000 enplanements one day. On an average day when you'd have 2.7, 2.6 million people passing through TSA checkpoints. Thank God that changed. Leisure travel came back, as both Nick and George had mentioned. It's dipped. I think our challenge going forward as airports is When airlines are successful, when cargo is successful, we're successful, our enplanements go up, passenger throughput in our airports goes up. But this has been an enormous challenge for US airports because we had to react right away to make people feel safe in the first step in their journey. When they leave their cars or their Uber or their bus or whichever way they get to the airport, when they get there, they still have to go either check their bags, go through TSA checkpoint, go and maybe have something to eat at a concession, stand at a gate and then get on an airplane before the journey even begins. So our job as airports is to make certain that we made them as clean and as safe as possible. I can tell you in the 8 years I've had this job, I've been to a lot of airports, and the ones I've been to either during COVID or right now, I've never seen them as clean as they are now. And they will continue to be that way. Airports have adapted. I mean, plexiglass, you're going to see that for a long time. TSA checkpoints, plexiglass. You're going to have basically hands-off technology, both at the front of the airport with TSA and the back of the airport with Customs and Border Protection. I was in Montreal last week, and I filled out my Arrive Can app. I showed my vaccination, my PCR test. I got through Customs in Montreal in about 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Now, on a normal day, there's a lot more passengers there, but they had figured out how to get us into Canada. We haven't still figured out how to get Canadians back in the US, which I think will help with our enplanements moving forward, not only in Canada, but around the world. And in the priority of things for airports, we're happy domestic leisure was up. Business is going to take a while to get back, but international is the key. All of our, what I call our ring airports on either coast that serve both Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world have suffered greatly with the loss of enplanements in international. And that will eventually come back only, as Nick and George have said, when we coordinate our efforts to be able to get people there, and our testing requirements are identical. And so people feel safe jumping from border to border.
Steve, passenger traffic slowed dramatically during the pandemic, but cargo kept the world connected. Your members thrived in many ways, but that is not to say that your membership is not without its considerable challenges. So tell me about how your members have navigated some of those challenges that might have made operations a little bit more difficult.
Thanks, Faye. Thanks for asking me a question where I don't have to suck up to Nick.
Steve is always shy.
Yeah, we probably the lucky part of the industry. We have had more business than we can actually handle. Nick mentioned, I do have to suck up to Nick. Nick mentioned one of our biggest problems, and that's the lack of international standards, mostly in our business, not for the passengers, but for the crews. We never knew when people were taking off whether they were going to have to quarantine in a foreign country. The rules in foreign countries change day to day. We've had pilots that have been detained, and it's hard when you're trying to run an around the world service. If your pilots get detained, it's a very difficult situation. The other problem we've had, I shouldn't complain about, and that's that the buying habits of the American public have changed. No one shops at malls anymore. They shop online. E-commerce today is where we expected e-commerce to be in 2025. That was coupled with the pandemic's need to carry equipment and then vaccines all over the country and all over the world. And all of this started happening during our high seasons of November and December. What that meant was we were really backed up, and just having enough planes, having enough warehouse space. You know, I feel a little bit guilty saying this, but almost having too much business to adequately serve the consumer has been one of our major problems. And if I may, I'd like to point out, with respect to the unruly passengers, during this whole thing, we've never had an unruly box attack the cockpit.
Yeah, Steve, I've heard you say before, the boxes don't talk back.
Yeah.
So. That's good. Well, Steve, you raise a good point that cargo, that industry is doing now what it was predicted to do in 2025. Lots of changes, and lots of changes across aviation. So just very broadly, internationally and domestically, how has the industry changed? May seem obvious to all of us in the room, but sometimes when you're living something, just standing back and talking about the big picture is very helpful. And I guess how many of those changes are going to be long lasting?
So I think the changes that we see now are, for the foreseeable future, going to be with us for a while. until we get a control over whatever variants might be coming at us, because this thing is not going away anytime soon. They might have a solution. We have another shot coming up, maybe for those of us who are about to either be 65 or above. But when I look around, I have, in our organization, we have 5 regions. North America seems to be in the best shape in terms of vaccinations. When I look at my colleague who runs ACI Africa, I feel terrible for them because their air travel is down to just about nothing. They have no vaccination. And if we're going to get international travel going again, there has to be a more equal distribution of vaccines. So when people feel safe traveling to Africa, or coming from the Middle East, or coming from Asia into the United States and backwards. So I think what it's done is it's changed our industry for the good, that we are more conscious about the health of our passengers. I think what it's also done is we all realize that we are on this echo sphere of aviation. We all work together, whether you're in cargo, whether you're in the airlines, whether you're represent the ultra low-cost carriers or just airports. We're all in the same mix together. And somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, one of my board members, how are you guys getting along with A4A these days? And I said, other than the one issue it's always separated us, which we won't bring up, we get along just well with these folks, because we realize in order for the system to work, one has to be able to finish the sentence of the other in order to make it work. And because remember, the passengers that get on your planes go through our airports before they even get there. And for them to feel good about getting on their planes, they have to feel safe before they get on. So I think for good reasons, we're going to say, hopefully this will keep us all healthy, and pray that we get a control of this thing. Because I don't know about you folks, but I'm getting tired of hearing about new variants coming along and people who don't take their shots, and people who are infecting other people. And it's really putting fear in people. So I'm a positive person. I see the future is bright. We're going to have to get through this cloud layer first before we land.
But to have that infrastructure in the United States, which we didn't have before,
right,
to respond. Like I was working in Asia during the SARS crisis, and they learned more quickly and were able to implement more quickly during this crisis those changes that we're just learning and we're just putting into place. I think and that does not come without cost to both airports, national governments, local governments, and airlines. But nonetheless, we are now going to have at least that basic infrastructure in place to respond more quickly. We were going from almost zero to where we are now. And then I think we're going to be in a better place to respond to whatever comes at us next. We may not be perfect and we may not be ready for it entirely, but we will be in a better place.
I think a hallmark of this has been the resiliency of the industry. It reacted very quickly. And I mean, the entire industry. We had the airframe manufacturers looking at what could be done. We had the airlines looking at it. We had the labor looking at it, the airports. I think all those things have been put in place, like the enhanced disinfection, both at airports. Airports are much cleaner. Airplanes are much cleaner, let's be honest, than they used to be. That is not going away. Also, I think this pandemic, if it's done anything, it has increased the cooperation in the industry, including labor. Without what we did with labor, the CARES Act never would have happened, and never would have happened 3 times, certainly. But we acted basically as just an unemployment office passing money through to keep people on, and that was critical in all sorts of ways to doing it. But also in terms of touchless technology, biometrics, and other aspects of that we had talked about as an industry that were being brought forward, came forward much more quickly. And I think the multiplier effort on that has been considerable and will continue to be. There's a lot of things that I think were given a time frame previously, and those time frames are being pushed forward because we know that we can do it.
And I think, going back to one of the things I mentioned about e-commerce, I don't think the surge in e-commerce is a temporary surge. I think that's going to continue. I know that when my wife needs to buy something, she goes online and buys 8 of them and returns 7. That's good for business. I like that. And I don't think that's going to change. So I think the buying habits of the public have changed. I think that's going to be true in the future. So I'm fairly confident in the cargo business and where it's going, both in terms of the ability to serve the customers and the ability to keep up with e-commerce. We're buying new planes, we're buying more planes. we're buying more fuel efficient planes, so I can give you a segue into the environment. You know,
Thank you
so
for that.
I think that all of this is good news. It's been a struggle for all of us. And it's been a struggle for us too. And we certainly empathize with everybody else. But I think those are the trends that we're seeing.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I noticed, and we talked about this morning, is that, you know, between the main lines and the regionals, just the communications have gotten so much more thorough and fast, and you know, communications is key, but we all communicate a lot as well. And I think that was, again, I'm careful to say there are silver linings in this pandemic, but one thing that we've learned and we're stronger for throughout, I think, is to lean on one another. And so, for example, you know, January 6th, a very dark time in our nation, and also a kind of a frightening time in the sky. And Nick and George and I and Sarah Nelson and some of the other flight attendant leaders were all on the phone and talking with one another, and then jointly talking with the FAA. And those are just some of the ways that we all work together to do what individually we may not have been doing as effectively. So I wanted to reflect back and appreciate all the ways that we did work together. So Steve, I will take your cue, and I am going to ask you about sustainability. So we all want it, and our members are actively pursuing it. Your members are actively pursuing it. We've had some successes, but we all want to ensure that this industry that we love can keep people connected, but also protect the planet. Airlines have pledged to meet the net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050. It's an aggressive target. It's a very important measure of support from U.S. government. It seems to be moving. That's related to sustainable aviation fuel. So Nick, you were very aggressive in pursuing that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, we have all worked on the environment for a long time in these various government private partnerships in terms of working with our regulators on programs, innovative programs. And frankly, there's been progress, but it's been a really long haul. There's a really long haul ahead of us right now. And the admonition that we always hold out right now is setting goals is good, putting the infrastructure legislatively and policy-wise behind that, which really requires help from the federal government and state and local governments as well. It will not happen without that. So we've now upped the goal to get to $3 billion of sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. That is extraordinarily aggressive. You know, it requires work on feedstocks. It requires work on tax credits like the blender's tax credit, keeping it at a level that is sufficient to make producers interested in producing it. But that is the biggest single chunk of savings and emissions that this industry can find. And that's meantime with all of the OEMs and all of our other partners looking at ways to improve aircraft, improve the airport infrastructure. And, you know, we're looking again at putting the band back together, not only on the Harvard, the public health side of it and the virus side of it, but on the environmental side of it, because we all basically are working on our own. We need to aggregate what we're doing to make the case together. That includes our labor partners, because again, goals are one thing, but producing actual results is going to take a huge commitment. So we've talked to the administration about that, because it's not just SAF, but also there's all different kinds of infrastructure. There's next gen. And when I say next gen, I'm providing the type of equipment that you need, the incentives to get to that equipment, because without that, you can't solve the whole problem. And that's looking creative at flight path and a variety of other things. It's a huge job. We're all committed to it, but we need help with it.
Well said.
I was going to say, we need to depoliticize it a little bit too, because this could very well get derailed by changes in administrations where we have this target, we take away the money, and then it still stays. And it remains an important target. I think we're all we're all aware of that. But if we depoliticize it in some way and stick to it, it's going to be much easier than these ups and downs, which we could face, and then find ourselves in 2045 far from the target.
Yeah. Can I say,
Go ahead.
I'll just say one more thing. And that is, as we move towards these goals, here's the fear. we should have goals. We should have partnerships and collaboration, just like we all do with TSA and the FAA. And that's, I'm talking all parts of government that have an impact on this. What we don't want to do is get mandates, because mandates are not the way to get to where we want to go. And my fear is, if no one grabs a hold of this right now to try to push it through from the government side and will not work as diligently as we have to, and I'm not, this is not a criticism, but I worry as we get towards 2030 and beyond that there's going to be a deflection effort where, since it didn't happen, it's all the airline's fault. It's all the airport, you know.
Faye, we committed as a global entity to 2050 as well. And our challenges are a little bit different than the airlines. We fully supported what you're doing on SAF. But our challenges are, how do we make airports net neutral? And that involves different challenges. That makes the challenge of how do we heat and cool the place? How do we work with the airlines that when the planes are at the gate, they're not running their APUs, right? That they're running on air coming from a net neutral site on an airport. All the other things that go along with it, all the tugs that are on an airport ground. How do we make that whole property of an airport net neutral by 2050? One of the challenges I think we have, folks, is that these are all great aspirational goals. 2050 is a long time from now. And I know Steve will be around at 2050 to be dealing with this, but I'm not quite sure the rest of us will be. But the reality is we have to hold on to that 2050 and make certain that the people who replace us eventually, our teams and our industries, are committed to that goal over the course of time. Else it could be dropped. And because we are in a crisis. I mean, and these are the industries that can really make a difference. But it's not cheap. It is not cheap to do any of this stuff. It's infrastructure, it's changes of infrastructure, it's working as a team. Again, we can't do all of the infrastructure as an industry unless we all realize what the cost is and how do we figure out how to pay for all this stuff. Because it's not going to be, it's going to be expensive, but it's not going to work if we don't work as a team.
Oh, and that's a perfect segue. I mean, my next question is, our industry, Steve's industry, we are aggressively pursuing electric aircraft, and that'll be yet another innovation. And of course, to encourage them into the system, we need to make sure that the charging infrastructure is there and that it is not so expensive as to disincentivize these investments that are so important. But we know that that will take investment by the airport. So, how are you balancing that? How are you balancing the need for this funding and the investment and also the price sensitivity of a airline industry that's very much still recovering?
Well, if the airlines want to go to electric aircraft, that's great. Okay, we want passengers to go airports, whether they're running on Jet A or they're running on battery. You want people going through an airport. Again, the challenge is infrastructure. We do every 2 years an infrastructure needs study, and every 2 years that number goes up. Our last one, which is this year, we got about $115 billion in needs, and that's every airport in the United States reporting their infrastructure needs on a whole host of projects. In this infrastructure bill that the senator talked about today, we have I pray that it stays there, but we have $25 billion, of which will go over a 5-year period to help airports. It's not a lot, but it's a lot better than getting zero. If we're going to commit as an airport industry to help put in electric, okay, and charging stations and plug-ins, then the airlines, the manufacturers, everybody who is going to eventually benefit from that are going to have to figure out a way to share in the cost. Because again, the way I look at it from an airport perspective, we have lots of airports, many of them are old, many of them have to adapt when the industry that we serve adapts. And we've seen this with aircraft, even current aircraft, where our terminals or our gates are too small for some aircraft to park, so they have to figure out another place to park them. So it's about infrastructure and it's about working together. And if we do have electric powered aircraft that are zero emissions, more power to all of us, but we have to figure out a way to pay for it and have it as available to every airport they fly to, which is an incredible amount of cooperation and expense.
One of the things that occurs to me is I don't think we can sit here and assume the structure of the industry in terms of airlines and airports are going to be the same in 10 years as they are today. When we talk about electric equipment, when we talk about the new innovations that are being made in the industry, I'm simply not sure that a lot of the things that are on the drawing boards today are actually going to operate from today's traditional airports. So UPS has bought eVTOL equipment that they're going to use. Their original PR statement said they're going to operate to and from UPS facilities. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means for integration into the national airspace. I don't know what it means in terms of the facilities, whether UPS would then become an airport, a new member for you, Kevin.
Oh, yeah.
But
We welcome them, yeah.
I
We have
think
to share the membership money with Nick, though.
No, I'll handle that.
Nick will handle anybody's money. But I think that when we look into the future, we have to realize that the world is changing. Short-term cargo delivery may be made with these new electric vehicles and may be made with drones. And I think one of the biggest challenges over the next 5 to 10 years is for the government regulators and the agency to figure out how to manage the airspace. So it's safe and efficient and allows us to do the things that we need to do as the industry matures and we get to these new areas. I know some comment was made this morning because I had a spy watching about, you know, cargo planes that are electric and maybe even pilotless planes and all of this new stuff that's coming along. We've got to figure out how that gets managed into the system. And if I could go back just for 1 second on the environmental issue, one of the things that I think is really important is we don't know everything. We need to continue the research into how we get from point A to point B. SAF is the biggest issue that gets us the biggest bang for the buck in the most quick manner. But we've got to do the research to figure out what's next, what do we need to do? And it's important that the FAA have the funding for their CLEAN program, for their Ascent program, for all the things that are their joint efforts by the industry and government to find better ways to make aircraft, to make them quieter, to make them more fuel efficient. All those things, as Kevin points out, takes money. And so Senator Wicker mentioned the FAA reauthorization bill. I think the FAA reauthorization bill this one is absolutely crucial as we look forward, because we can't just do what we've done in the past. We've got to recognize the advances that are coming.
Yeah.
And if I could just add, so I don't want to be a Luddite here, but I will tell you that as you all are restructuring and purchasing electric aircraft now, I know you're not. There's some basic physics here, which we haven't overcome yet. And so the idea that we're going to have electric aircraft with large scale operations for cargo and passenger operations, there are some major problems still. And so SAF actually is the most approachable, best investment at this point with existing technology that we know will work. It will work with existing technology. Batteries eventually will get a little bit lighter. Planes will have better efficiencies on electric motors. But I remember years ago, the very light jets, if you guys remember, we're supposed to have 40,000 VLJs flying all over the place with families going, you know, they were going to drop you all and they were going to go in, they were going to take their family in a VLJ. Well, it never made any sense. It never made any economic sense, but we had all these projections that the skies were going to be filled with VLJs. We have the same problem with electric aircraft, actually. The technology is not there. The physics is not there yet. The storage technologies are not there, and the infrastructure is not there. So,
but George, you got to remember those vehicles we're talking about don't have to be electric.
Yeah,
we've talked about electric vehicles. What I'm saying is there are going to be unique vehicles operating between short range things, and they may be SAF powered aircraft. What I'm saying is that when we look into the future, it's not only electric vehicles. I mentioned those because that seems to be the flavor of the day, but we're going to have new types of vehicles doing new types of things. And if we're looking 5 and 10 years into the future as opposed to tomorrow, absolutely, SAF is absolutely crucial. We're all part of the coalition that's supporting that. But as we look toward the FAA reauthorization bill, we really need to figure out what the best bang for the buck is. We need to put money into research, and we have to recognize that the aircraft of 10 years from now may not be the same type, whether they're electric or other powered.
I agree. I just don't think we go all George Jetson yet. So I mean, we're not there. And that's one of the things that while we have to prepare for the future, we also have to be realistic about how we get there. And I think that's true of drones. I think it's true of eVTOLs. I think there's a lot of promise there, and it's exciting, but there's also a lot of impediments to those actually being economical and actually affordable for people to use for cargo or passenger operations. So that's all.
I think, and just jumping on what George said, I think we're a step-by-step process here. If you look at electric vehicles and there's zero emissions from a tailpipe that doesn't exist, those cars aren't really net zero. They're powered up by plugging into a source of electricity, which comes from a power plant. And the real issue is, are those power plants going to be net neutral? So you're not really going to get absolute net zero by going to battery. And then, as we talked about, what do you do when the battery's dead? Where do you store it? Or how do you dispose of it? So we have an ongoing environmental issue, which will undoubtedly be solved over time. But we are doing it step by step. And the technology we praise today might be old-fashioned in 10 years. I wonder, geez, we thought this was good.
Yeah.
And it might have been good for now, but it made it like a lot of technology, it leads to another step, which makes it better.
So to Steve's point, really right now we're trying to plan and fund for technology that either doesn't exist yet or we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And that's a huge challenge. And yet at the same time, now's the time to plan. Now's the time to start preparing for that. So with FAA reauthorization, it's kind of early to say it's coming up, but it is upon us. And we're starting to gather our objectives. What I'm hearing across the board is investment is appropriate, but how should we be investing? What are we looking at for FAA reauthorization?
We're going to have to make the determination what the priority of investments should be. And I am enamored of Senator Wicker's idea about us trying to
I
get
was going to say
together
that too.
and do it. As a veteran of only a couple, it can be a very difficult proposition, but we can't keep doing it the way we do. And I think you have to look at investments in a far more dynamic fashion. While the airports are going to have considerable expense, the people making the investment in electric aircraft for all the research and development on that. And as you know, a lot of our members are investing in technologies, in startup companies, both on SAF, on electric vehicles, on hydrogen vehicles. So it's a matter of looking at it broadly. I'm pretty taken with what Steve said, though, about we don't know really what 10 years from now is going to look like. There may be breakthroughs in research and technology. We can all hope for that. But we do have to be agile enough to figure it out and realize that, fighting for every last dime as an industry may be one thing, but among ourselves might be a little bit different.
How about you, Kevin? What are the airports looking for?
Well, we're looking to modernize, continue to modernize, because we can't modernize if the airlines are modernizing with new aircraft, new equipment. We have to go along with that. Yeah. When I travel around the world, when I look at what we have as airports, and I look at Europe, I look at Asia, even South America, Central America, we have old airports here in the United States because of our governance structure. They're not uniform. Our Canadian members all have much more modern airports than we have here in the US because they pay for them differently. They have a different financing structure. They have their version of the P word, but it's not required by their government. I'm not going to bring it up today.
Well, you've implied it 3 times, so
Yeah.
I'm eventually.
But
in a minute, I'm going to have to say
You'll
something.
have to say the PFC. Okay, we'll say the PFC.
Forget the PFC, but all this about investment. If you look in the investment that airlines have made in airports over the last 10 years, it's billions and billions and billions of dollars, and the results are there. And it's not just LaGuardia and San Francisco and LAX. It's Sioux City. It's a lot of smaller airports too. So, and that will continue. But why? Because it's in our interest to do so.
Right.
And it can become economical if you make the investment and you get more flyers.
Right. Absolutely. Don't disagree at all.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think when we look at it, the question was, how do we look at this moving forward? All of our some of our parts have to modernize. Okay, now how we get there, we haven't determined that yet. Okay, FAA reauthorization is going to be an interesting process, and hopefully it's a constructive process, and which we all get what we need to modernize. Okay, and I think cooler heads have to prevail as we make these discussions. I think everybody should be open to new ideas about how we do this as we move forward. But the reality is as an airport aviation infrastructure, we have to kind of modernize at the same pace, because you don't want one to be behind the other, because it's going to make everything else look like it's not modern.
I think one of the things that we've all agreed on, you know, across the board really is just how important aviation is. It drives our economy. It's just such an integral part of the country. In fact, you know, that larger airlines were participating in the craft program. So tremendous contributions, you know, across the entire nation, and we should be funding it appropriately. So I think given its economic footprint, a healthy general fund contribution to airports and everything that they fund is something that we all agree on.
As long as you mention that, I know we've been talking long-term. Can I talk real short-term? We need to avoid a shutdown of the government. And I say that in the context of aviation. The Federal Aviation Administration is unlike many of the other agencies in this town. It's an operating entity as well as just a policymaking entity. And the chaos that happens every time you get a government shutdown with people not knowing whether they can get paid, they eventually do, but there's still a stress level there. What the controllers go through every time there's one of these shutdowns. We're within a week of chaos. So for everybody in this room who knows anybody in Congress, tell them no, fund the damn agencies.
Yeah, wow, absolutely. So Steve and George, we worked really closely over the past decade to ensure that enough new pilots are entering the industry to continue connecting people and packages tomorrow. Unfortunately, about half of today's working pilots are ready to retire within the next 15 years. And we don't have to guess at that. We know it because of the mandated age 65 retirement. And at the same time, the production of new pilots is not keeping pace. And in fact, the pandemic has accelerated this in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways is, as you would expect, in 2020, the new pilot certificates took a huge dip. But even in 2021, year-to-date production has been so slow and so sluggish that if it continues, we are on track to produce about 3,800 new pilots this year. So all we have to do is cross-reference that with just some of Nick's members' hiring announcements. And, you know, I think I'm not going to ask the question, is the pilot shortage back? But what is the impact? And are we going to see industry contraction again? And I'm going to start with you, Steve.
Well, I don't think you see industry contraction, and I think that we will muddle through this crisis. I think we'll get the pilots. I think what people have realized in the industry is they can't just sit back and wait for people from the military to retire and become commercial pilots. That's not happening. And you can't just sit back and say, well, we've got all these universities out there and all these trade schools. It's not only pilots, it's mechanics, and it's everybody that works in the industry. We can't just sit back and say they will come, you know, if you need them, they will come. That's not going to happen. And so there are a lot of initiatives going on right now, both within industry generally and with specific companies. Companies have established their own programs to develop with universities, feeder type operations. I know FedEx has their Purple Runway program, and others have other programs that they have internally decided that they need to generate the workforce that they need. And so they're working with the educational institutions in their areas to provide these. From an industry level, we've been working with people like Vaughn College in New York, Embry-Riddle. Yvette, our senior VP, is now on the industry advisory board of Embry-Riddle. We've done a lot of work with Vaughn College. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but I know one of our members, Atlas, has about 10% of its workforce coming straight out of Vaughn College. I think it's important, again, you come down to the money issue. How do you afford to become a pilot and get there? So some of the companies have taken it upon themselves to provide that, but we need more general funding for people, loans, loan guarantees, whatever we can do to get. And the other thing we need to do is, this is sort of a sexy industry. We have to convince the younger people that it is, and we have to get them interested in it. When the Management Advisory Council of the FAA had one of its meetings at Vaughn College in New York, and we had a student panel, and we asked them, what turns you on about this industry? How do you find out about this industry? And they talked about technologies none of us old people ever even knew about, on how they talk to each other about where they're going in life, what they're going to do, how they communicate. Communications are absolutely crucial in all of this. And if people don't know about our jobs, don't know about our industry, they're not going to jump into it. So those are the challenges we face. I think we recognize those challenges, and I think we're going to get there.
And I think Steve's right. The problem is, of course, Vaughn College is a bad microcosm because they're already interested in aviation.
Right.
And the problem is really getting people, and this means diversifying the workforce too. It means getting more women, more minorities into an interest in aviation, which we don't have right now. And I think that's what, I think you had Chris Sharp here earlier. You know, I know FAA is doing a lot of this work. So they're trying, but it is hard to convince young people today that this is an industry to get, and it's not just pilots, it's mechanics.
Absolutely.
We're facing a severe mechanic shortage, and those are great paying jobs that you don't need a 4-year degree for. They require technical skills and they have a secure future. And so I think a lot of that is convincing kids that this is something to look at, like look at this career track, whether it be a pilot or a mechanic, but aviation is an industry with a future. And I think that's one of the things that somebody needs to know. If I go in that, will I have a job 15 years from now or 20 years from now? And that's what we have to, that's part of our job, is to sell that as a real future and a secure future for people. You know, as much as you can convince any 18-year-old what a secure future is. So, you know, but nonetheless, it's a sales job we all have to do.
So Faye, we don't hire pilots, but we have equivalent challenges in getting people, young people, interested in working at airports. I mean, it's not as sexy as being a pilot, but when you go to a place like Embry-Riddle, they have dual programs. They have the airport side and then they have the aviation side. The challenge we have is getting them interested at a younger age. So when they get to that point where they have to make a decision about where they want to go to school, do we push them in that direction? And I think more of our industry has to be marketing itself better than it does. We have a new program we've set up called Edge for Vets, where we are going to recently retired vets who are highly trained individuals to say, hey, look, you can use your skills that you learned in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, Marines, the Coast Guard, and apply them to well-paid jobs at airports that help support the industry. You can't have a well-run airport without well-trained people who have very specific jobs that are unique to our industry. And whether it be in the finance, you know, whether in the corporate side of the airport side or the operations side, they're all very unique. So I look at it as we have to continue to do a marketing job with younger people to say, and veterans, to say, hey, there are jobs here. Let us help you get to that direction. It's not as expensive as teaching somebody how to fly an airplane. I'll be honest with that. However, there are needs, you know, educational needs that these young people will need that we can help them with.
Well, and airports are such a natural place. I mean, it's said for good reason that you're the front door of aviation. So, you know, so many people get their first look at aviation in the airport environment. So, and you all have been really strong allies as well, in particular on our pilot workforce issues. And you've got some member airports here in our audience as well. And so both you and your members have been very strong supporters on that too. Nick, your members are in an enviable, or a slightly different position, an enviable recruiting pipeline. They often draw from our members, where if we do say so ourselves, they're going to find some of the best and most professional pilots in the business. And that's a good thing. Ultimately, that's a good thing. And in fact, our members and your members have embraced this through flow programs. And Steve, you mentioned the Purple Runway, but all of the major airlines now have this, which gives some recruiting, certainty and career certainty, the pilots, which that's very good. So how do your members view the pilot supply issue?
Differently, in the sense among themselves. Different. Some think there's a pilot shortage right now. Some see a pilot shortage coming. Everybody's aware of the situation and working with you all. You know, we do have that feeder system that works. The military has been choked off pretty much, you know, and we've been asked not to recruit actually in some cases. But we've all got to look to the future, and our members are taking steps to work with the regional partners and others, in many cases creating their own programs to try to increase the diversity of the pilot workforce going forward, and to make sure, and again, we keep using, it is all about the pipeline because it takes a long time. It is expensive. Steve appropriately mentioned loans and loan guarantees. We've gotten, frankly, not anywhere near success on Capitol Hill with that, where you can get a student loan to become an accountant, to become any other thing, but you can't get one to become a pilot.
Yeah. Well, this is incredible to me that the industry has done so much. We've made so many investments in that outreach and in making the career path as attractive as possible on the other side of the fence. But if you can't get over it, you can't get into this industry. So shameless plug, but everybody up here on this panel is part of a coalition working together to fix exactly that. We've got a shortage. We have a lack of diversity in the industry, and we have a really expensive training path for which there's not adequate funding, and none of that makes sense. So we're very hopeful that we'll have legislation introduced in Congress this year to do exactly that. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? No, I'm teeing them up just as Drew's walking back. No question. Okay, so my question, and you touched on this a little bit, but maintenance technicians, how worried about that should we be? I mean, we're hearing that we're losing this morning. It was said that we're losing them to the elevator industry of all things. I've heard the amusement parks before, but maintenance technicians, half of them will be retiring in the next 15 years. And I think I read somewhere that just like 2% of those are being replaced. I mean, that to me is a real crisis. So what are some of the outreach programs we ought to be doing on maintenance technicians? What are some of the challenges you think that are preventing people from coming into that industry? Because I won't say it's not money, but it's not as, I don't think it's as sharply an issue of not being able to afford the training there.
It's the exact same issue. I mean, because the training for that is a shorter term training. It's focused. It's not inexpensive, but you're an 18-year-old. You could do an 18-month program and have a $65,000 a year job. Right? There's very few industries that have that right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of 4-year college graduates or graduate school students that would kill for salaries like that. And I think that is the type of information that needs to get out there about, hey, here is a career path, which, if a 4-year college isn't right for you, or you don't want, or you want to get right to work, or or you're coming out of the military after a short-term enlistment, these are ideal jobs. And I think we as an industry and the maintenance, I mean, the airlines have to do a better job with this, because we're seeing this everywhere. This is not there's not geographic specific areas where we have shortages. It's all over the country. And we're seeing it. There are job postings everywhere, and there are competitive offers out there, and there's poaching. I mean, it's worse than Wall Street. I mean, they're trying to get these guys from one place to another, and you're in demand if you're in that industry right now. And you can be that at 19 and a half. You could have an amazing career ahead of you and have job offers thrown at you. And I can't think of many places or many careers that can say that right now.
Yeah.
But that word's not out there. I know that. I can't train to be an AM. My eyesight's too bad. So, and I'm not smart enough. So, but those are out there. You can have those jobs. And I think that's what we need to do, is get the word out in the high schools that, and in minority communities and, everywhere. There's these amazing jobs out
And
there.
women. Yeah. Women too.
Sure, why not? Yeah.
Bring us in.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's exactly right. Women and minorities, because we have ignored a large portion of the population with this great opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that word needs to get out there.
Absolutely.
And that's the only way to fill this.
If our flight decks and our hangars looked like our cabins, we wouldn't have these shortages right now. So we know we need to be more aggressive on those
Right.
diversity objectives as well, not just because
Exactly.
it's the right thing to do, but because it just makes good sense with business.
Right.
Well, I've often said that it is almost easier to predict, what 10 years looks like in the airline industry than to predict the next couple of years. But I am going to ask you that hard question all the same. So the last question, just down the line, really, what do you think your sector of the industry will look like over the next 2 to 3 years? And also, what do you think is the most important focus that you can take, or we can all take together, to make sure we're the healthiest and best versions of ourselves? George?
I think the ULCCs will have 40% of the market within 3 years. I'm kidding.
That's true.
Yeah, but I'd like
It's a lightning round.
That'd be great. Yeah. No, I think you will see a growth of the ULCCs, and I think you will see a growth of point-to-point services more. But nonetheless, I mean, I think we are going to have to see a better integration. I don't think we're going to have the type of fallout we saw in the industry where we had a lot of consolidation and a lot of job loss and other things and restructuring. But I think you will see there will be additional and continued growth in the leisure market. And that's both for A4A members and our members.
Okay.
And I think that's going to grow probably faster than anything else right now.
Kevin, what's your take?
Well, our success really is how many more people we get on planes. And, our employments, we base our success by employments. The more, but I look at it, it's been very uneven to date. And some airports have achieved and exceeded 2019 levels. Some are way airports that you would think, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles, like Seattle, big hubs that haven't gotten anywhere close to their 19 levels. A lot of that have to do with people's ability to travel and feeling safe to get back on planes. Back to our earlier points, I would say as an industry, we're looking at in the US probably another 2 years before we're collectively back to where we were in 19. I can say in Canada, they're talking about 25, 26, because they were essentially shut down. They had regions of that country that just did not fly because they could not fly between or travel between their provinces. So again, if the airlines improve, people continue to fly, that will be accelerated, but it will not be an even recovery, especially when it comes to international. If international opens up, then the floodgates will open. If business travel opens up, the floodgates will open. And that's another issue we didn't talk about today is business is we've noticed, and I'm sure Nick and you folks have noticed this as well, companies have adapted to keeping their salespeople at home.
Yeah.
We can see it in trade show attendance, is that the reality is that people have figured out how to sell their products or go places and do things looking into a screen rather than seeing people in person. I don't think that's going to last forever because I think we're humans and we have to be together. But for the time being, I think business travel is helped the bottom line of companies that were hurting. And so that cost has been down, but eventually they have to be back on the road. So I say 2 years gross. Yeah.
Okay, so were you asking the short-term question or the long-term question?
You can answer whichever you like.
Okay, short-term, it's going to be rocking. There's going to be up and downs depending on what happens with the variant. I do think it will continue to get better. I personally believe that business travel will come back faster than many people expect because there was a pent-up demand for leisure travel. There is a hugely pent-up demand for people to get out and see face-to-face. You can't read social cues on Zoom. When you're looking at a screen this big, you can't do many of the things that you do to create credibility and trust with customers or potential customers. In the longer term, we are an ever adaptive industry and we are always striving to improve. You're going to see a better customer experience that is more seamless, more highly technical, which scares the hell out of me personally because I'm suffering through what exists now. But I think you're going to see a lot of changes and many changes that we can't predict right now. But between biometrics, the increase in technology, just think about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago and what you could do with your phone, which was almost nothing. Now it runs your whole program, the entertainment comes over. So you're going to see a lot of changes. We will continue to improve the customer experience, plain and simple. And I think the efficiencies that will come in cargo are going to be apparent even with the current load. I'm glad your wife doesn't order until she needs something. It's a little different home. But I've seen this notion you buy 3 or 4 or 5 sizes. I may have just done that this morning. And then you ship them back. So all good.
My husband does the same thing. No, I agree with you, Nick. I also don't think that the business travelers are going to be gone for long, and I think they're going to come back. I mean, just this all of us together. Some of us have seen each other for the first time in person in 18 months. Once you do it, once you travel and you think, oh, it is safe. And it felt great to see one another again. I think that people want to keep doing it again and again.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it does.
I agree with that. I mean, I was so happy when you invited us because and then you said it wasn't going to be virtual, that made me even happier.
Well,
And there are meetings and convention. I know Kevin's having his meeting. I know RACA is having its meeting in Scottsdale in October. I'm looking forward to going out to that. Staff is going down to Charleston for an Iowa conference, International Women's Conference. I think we're seeing the seeds of business travel returning. And we don't know what's going to happen with another variant. We don't know which way the sine curve is going to go. But I think that that's really good signs. From our industry, it's going to be more of the same, I think, because as I said earlier, I think e-commerce is here to stay. I hope we don't have to carry vaccines in an emergency basis very much longer. But one of the things we haven't mentioned here today that I think we also have to take into consideration is we talk a lot about the environment, but the environment's very complex, and a lot of the things we need to do from a modernization standpoint, better routing, saving fuel, all those things run smack into the issue of aircraft noise. And aircraft noise is not going to go away. It can get better. The towns and cities around this country are more sensitive and they're winning more lawsuits, unfortunately. And so some of the things we want to do to promote efficiency, to promote the environment, are going to run headlong into the airport noise issue. And it's not the airport noise issue, although they're at the front lines of this. It's the community noise issues where they say, we don't want planes flying over our head. And I think that the term that's been used among a lot of us that have talked about this is it's visual noise. There's suddenly planes flying over your head. It's not necessarily the noise they're making, but people love what aircraft do. They get them to see grandma, they get their Christmas presents, but they don't want that plane flying over their head. They want it flying over their neighbor's head. And that's going to be a challenge, a continuing challenge in the next few years.
Yeah. So I think flexibility is going to be key. I mean, we've just sort of, that's been a recurring theme. We've got to be flexible. We need to look at the future and a lot of unknowns. We need to recognize what we don't know, and we need to invest in it now. You have been a dream panel. I want to thank you very much for being here. Please join me in thanking our panel for this excellent session.